Got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit sick.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. I was talking with a homie of mine before I got up on here. He asked me, JT, what's the difference between the NFL and college football? Because he's not a diehard sports fan. He watches it occasionally, but he doesn't keep up with sports, college football, the NFL, as much as what we over here on JT Sports do. And I basically told him that in the NFL, they're not naming their divisions Monster Energy, AFC North Football, like how the Big 12 is. It's just in college football, you see the most insane storylines happen, storylines that if they were to even be mentioned in the NFL, you will have a hard time believing that it's actually true. But that's what makes college football so great. It's so chaotic. It's so wild. It adds to the intrigue of the sport because you never really know what's going to happen. That's why they have the phrase any given Saturday. And we're going to dive into a little bit more about the Big 12's new name, their new partnership with Monster Energy, along with Colorado. I know I told you guys I was done talking about this program. I was done talking about anything Deion Sanders, Shedeur related, but Julian Sayin, the projected starting quarterback for Colorado, made some wild accusations about this program last year. We'll also dive into some Big 10 football. I'm going to rank who I believe are going to be the top 10 best quarterbacks in this conference at the end of the season. Which new head coach in this conference is set up to have immediate success in their first year. The uncomfortable truth about Nebraska's actual ceiling under Matt Rhule. And I had a subscriber ask me a question about what makes Ohio State wide receiver you. If you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, you have come to the right place. We're talking all things football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content and you can get your daily football fix. And without further ado, let's dive into it. I want to project who I believe the 10 best quarterbacks in the Big 10 are going to be at the end of this season. I'm not doing a preseason ranking where I'm ranking all these guys based on how good they were last year. These rankings are solely based on how good I believe these guys are going to be and how they're going to be ranked when this season ends. And starting off at number 10, I have Rocco Beck, who follows Matt Campbell from Iowa State to Happy Valley. I have him at 10, not because I think he's going to be trash. I just think he'll be okay. Quarterback play in the Big 10 this year, I think is going to be the best that it's ever been. I think there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this conference, a lot of quarterbacks that have the potential to be potential first-round picks in next year's draft. Rocco Beck, he's solid, but he's not as dynamic. I don't view him as big as a game changer as some of the guys that are above him. He is a solid vet. He has been a 2-3-year starter at Iowa State. So you know what you're getting out of Rocco Beck. You're going to get a guy that's going to put you in position to win, but I don't view him as a guy that if everything is going wrong, he can put the cape on and carry Penn State to a win. I think that he more so is just a good system quarterback. He kind of gives me like Stetson Bennett vibes. If the team around him is good, he's going to be functional. But I just wasn't really all that impressed with what he did at Iowa State. Don't think he sucks. I just think he'll be solid, not great, like how some of the quarterbacks ranked above him will be. At number 9, I got Nico Iamaleava. Sure, he didn't have that great of a season statistically at UCLA last year, but if you really watched UCLA football in 2025, Nico was really the only good thing about that team outside of maybe 2-3 other good players. With Bob Chesney coming in as UCLA's new head coach, him inheriting a quarterback with the physical talent, the physical gifts that Nico has, I feel should allow him to have a lot more early success than what you expect him to have at UCLA. I think that Nico still has a lot of untapped potential that the right head coach could get out of him, and I think that Bob Chesney will be that guy. And watching Nico last year, he was running the football a lot better than what he was at Tennessee. He had a few runs when he was putting the shoulder down looking for contact. I was going to myself, saying to myself in my head, okay, Nico, I see you. I see you trying to get big. So I think that Nico ends up having a really big breakthrough under Bob Chesney in his second season at UCLA. At number 8, I have Malik Washington. He set the record for most passing yards in the season from a freshman quarterback. Maryland right now has a head coach who has one of the hottest seats in the country, Mike Locksley, and Maryland fans don't really have a lot of faith that Mike Locksley can turn this thing around, but they hope that he can get it done, even though they're not that confident he can, because they don't want to risk losing Malik Washington, because if Mike Locksley gets fired, then Malik Washington, along with a bunch of other highly sought-after recruits that Mike Locksley was able to lock up and bring to the Terps program, they could be heading out the door along with Mike Locksley. So if Maryland is going to have a good season and Mike Locksley is going to save his job, Malik Washington is going to be a big part of that. He was very good as a true freshman. I thought he was the best true freshman in the country last season. There were some games when Mike Locksley had this brother slinging the ball 30, 40, sometimes 50 times. And this guy was a freshman, fresh out of high school. So for him to have the level of maturity and poise, despite his age, despite his inexperience, I'm very optimistic about the year 2 leap that Malik Washington is going to make at Maryland. And he could very well outplay where I have him ranked right now. I could see him maybe being one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the Big 10 by the time this season concludes. At number 7, I got Bryce Underwood. Bryce Underwood is going to improve. Kyle Whittingham is a way better coach than Sharon Moore. You also bring Jason Beck, who did a really good job developing Devin Dampier when he was at New Mexico State. He was one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in America, but more so, he was a better runner than he was a thrower. At Utah, he ends up improving his passing ability, and he had one of the highest QBRs in America. He was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country. So if Jason Beck can improve Devin Dampier's game with playing against tougher competition than what he was at New Mexico State, with the style of offense that he runs, RPO base, a lot of easy throws, easy reads, I expect for Bryce Underwood to play way better in year 2, since he has a lot more experience under his belt. He has a way better coaching staff with a way better offensive coordinator. He also has a better supporting cast. He actually has better than Amazon workers catching the football for him this year. So I'm expecting Bryce Young to improve. I don't think he becomes a Heisman contender in year 2, but I do think he looks a lot more functional than what he did at times last year. And I honestly don't think that Bryce Underwood was that bad, considering that he was a true freshman at 18 years old and the team really wasn't that good. But I understand why people have different opinions, because when you're paying somebody the amount that Bryce Underwood's getting paid, you expect better. So I think he'll be pretty solid. I don't know if he'll take a big enough leap to catapult himself into the top 5. He could, but right now I'll keep him at 7. At number 6, I got Anthony Colandrea. This is by far the most underrated transfer in college football coming into this season. He scored over 30 touchdowns last season at UNLV, playing for Dan Mullen, through 23 through the air, accounted for a few on the ground with his legs. He reminds me a lot of Baker Mayfield. And you put a Baker Mayfield kind of quarterback and a Dana Holgorsen offense, that's a recipe for a lot of success. And a lot of folks, myself included, believe Anthony Colandrea stylistically is a lot better for what Nebraska needs at quarterback than what they were getting out of Dylan Raiola. Now, some of you guys, if you're not a Nebraska fan, you're going to say, oh, that's just cold. This Anthony Colandrea guy can really play. I watched a lot of him because I bet a lot of money on UNLV last year because I'm a huge fan of Dan Mullen. This brother has a lot of bravado, a lot of guts and grits. He's the perfect quarterback for Nebraska. And a lot of Nebraska fans are kind of feeling a little bit down because you don't know if you can break out of just being better than the middle of the pack, middle of the road Big 10 team. But if you end up winning 9 games this year, Anthony Colandrea is going to be a huge part of that. And he could be a lot better than where I have him ranked at right now. He could be a top 3 quarterback in the Big 10. That's how good this brother is, and that's how good I expect him to be. If you don't know anything about Anthony Colandrea, go watch you some Anthony Colandrea highlights. You can't tell me this dude doesn't remind you just a little bit of Baker Mayfield. At number 5, I got Josh Hoover. I wanted to put Josh Hoover a lot higher, but I kept him at 5. We know he can play. We know that he's going to put points up on the board. The drop-off offensively for Indiana isn't going to be that big. I just think with Josh Hoover, though, I don't know if you can trust him as much in close games as what you could with Fernando Mendoza, because his huge issue is ball security. You don't trust him late in games to take care of the football. Now, part of the reason why he had such a huge turnover number at TCU was because they run an air raid offense. They're slinging that thing like 40, 50 times a game. And Curt Cignetti said when Josh Hoover first got to Bloomington, he met his 2 best friends, a run game and a good defense. So with those 2 things being added to Josh Hoover's repertoire, which he never had at TCU, him not having to throw the football as much should help cut his turnover numbers down somewhat. But even then, what does half of Josh Hoover's turnovers being sliced in half look like? If you're still telling me he has 8 or 9 interceptions, when do those interceptions occur? Because you better hope that it's not late in the 4th quarter against Ohio State, USC, or Oregon, because that could be the difference between Indiana repeating as Big 10 champs and them being on the outside looking in of the CFP at 9-3. So I got him at 5. Don't want to put him higher because I'm just not as confident as what Curt Cignetti is that turnover issue is going to get solved. At number 4, I got Damon Williams. This is great value brand version, Kyler Murray, with a little bit of flavor. Damon Williams is a lot tougher than Kyler Murray. He'll put his shoulder down. He'll fight for extra yards. He's not scared to get hit. It was a little bit weird how he tried to leave Washington after he just agreed to an extension at the start of the offseason. Don't blame the brother, because LSU gave him a Godfather offer. They gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. And if you saw how good Damon Williams was last season, you could understand why Lane Kiffin wanted this dude in Baton Rouge so bad. But he's still a Washington Husky, at least for this season. Nobody in the locker rooms want to be feeling any kind of way. Everybody knows it's a business. Jed Fish already said, water underneath the bridge. He could be good enough to win a Heisman this year. I think this, by far, is the most talented quarterback that Washington has ever had. Not the best. I said the most talented, because he plays a lot like Kyler Murray. He's 5'10", has a very strong arm, and is a very elite athlete, very elusive, turns into a running back in the open field. If he ends up improving from what he did last season, not only could he be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 10, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. How good Washington can be, their ceiling all depends on how big of a leap Damon Williams can take this year, because what does a leap look like for Damon Williams? Because last year he was already pretty good, through 25 passing touchdowns and had a relatively low interception number. So if you're telling me he takes another leap in 2026, I think that leap looks like him being a finalist for the Heisman Trophy, because he was already pretty freaking good last season. So how good can this guy really be? That question really scares me. At number 3, I got Julian Sayin. Now remember, this is me not ranking these quarterbacks based off what they did last season. This is me ranking these quarterbacks based on where I project them to finish at the end of this year, as far as ranking all these quarterbacks in this conference goes. And I think Julian Sayin will be the 3rd best quarterback in the Big 10. I know Ohio State fans are going to feel like he should be either 1 or number 2. But the thing with Julian Sayin is that I don't think he's going to have the same productivity this year as to what he had last year, since you're bringing in Arthur Smith as your offensive coordinator. And I've seen a lot of Arthur Smith these last few years in the NFL front. He was Tennessee's offensive coordinator the year they had that Cinderella run with Derrick Henry and made it to the AFC Championship in 2019. And then I saw when he was the head coach for the Falcons, when he got fired, became the Steelers' offensive coordinator for a few years. This dude is all about running the football. Run, and pound that rock some more. So I think Bo Jackson more so is going to benefit from the transition of going from Brian Hartline to Arthur Smith at offensive coordinator, since I expect this to be a more run-heavy offense than what it's been in years past. And that's why I think that Julian Sayin, his production might go down a little bit, not because he regresses as a player, but just because he's not going to be asked to do as much with Arthur Smith calling the plays now, as opposed to what he was doing last year. So I got him at number 3. At number 2, I got Dante Moore. He has the best receiving core in college football. Evan Stewart, DeCorian Moore. The list just goes on and on and on. He also should have a really good offensive line. So with everything Dante Moore has around him, plus with how good he was last season, this year, I still think that he should be around either the best or the 2nd best quarterback in the Big 10. I was very impressed with what I saw out of him, in spite of, the injuries that Oregon had to deal with late in the season. He kind of looked a little bit iffy in that Nebraska game, but I think he's probably the most talented quarterback in the Big 10 outside of the guy I have him behind at number 1, which is Jayden Maiava. Jayden Maiava is a bigger version of Caleb Williams to me. Very good improvising off script. He has phenomenal deep ball accuracy. He's really good at fitting balls in the tight windows. And sure, you can say that Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon kind of bailed him out on a few occasions. It kind of just felt like there were certain moments when Jayden Maiava would just say, F it. Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon, one of those boys is going to be open downfield, so I might as well just throw a prayer to one of those guys. And most of the time, they came down with it. But I think that Jayden Maiava was a much better quarterback than just a guy who was relying on prayers to Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. He had the second highest QBR in college football behind Fernando Mendoza, and he's entering his third season in Lincoln Riley's offense. Lincoln Riley is QBU. There is no school, in my opinion, that's QBU. QBU right now is Lincoln Riley. Anytime he has had a quarterback that has had 2 years or more of starting experience in his offense, they have become Heisman finalists. They have become good enough to be high draft picks in the NFL. And I think that Jayden Maiava is going to add to the already long list of graduates from Lincoln Riley School of QBU. And I think that he is a very underrated pick to win a Heisman Trophy, since you can never go wrong betting on a Lincoln Riley quarterback to win a Heisman Trophy. The dude has produced multiple of them. So these are the 10 quarterbacks that I believe are going to be the best in the Big Ten at the end of this season. Let me know your thoughts on my projections for the top 10 quarterbacks in this conference for this season coming up down in the comment section down below. Who's too high? Who's too low? Who got left off the list that you felt should have been included? Shout out to everybody that's tuned in wherever you're watching. If you're listening live on YouTube, if you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content. We're talking all things football, NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you are not subscribed, what are you waiting for, man? The season is just around the corner. You don't want to miss the new content that we're pumping out. Let's continue on. Out of all the first-year head coaches entering the Big Ten this season, Kyle Whittingham, I believe, is set up to have the most success immediately. Michigan already wants to win the exact same way that Kyle Whittingham has won throughout the entirety of his coaching career. Physical football, strong ground game, great trench play, good offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and the defense that makes you have to fight for every yard if you're the opposing offense. This team last year won 9 games being poorly coached. Jerome Moore was not a good coach, and it was evident with how this team was barely scraping by against teams that they should have been blowing out. And then you had the whole scandal come out with Jerome Moore freaking and geeking on the sidelines, or freaking and geeking with a female staff member. So bringing in Kyle Whittingham, you have an adult in the building. And if you can win 9 games with Jerome Moore, also with everything that he had going on off the field, that was a distraction for this program. I don't think that it's unfathomable to see Kyle Whittingham taking Michigan to the college football playoffs in year 1. The floor is already high. And Kyle Whittingham overachieved at Utah. He brought Utah more success than their program has ever experienced. Sure, he never made it to the college football playoffs, never won a national championship, but not every coach can be defined by how many playoff appearances they had, how many national championships do they have. When you judge Kyle Whittingham, you have to judge him based off what he had to work with at Utah at the time and how much he elevated that program. Utah is a better program now than what they were before Kyle Whittingham became head coach. So you give a guy that has already done more with less throughout the entirety of his career, more resources, unlimited resources damn near at Michigan. With Bryce Underwood entering his second season, how much he improves under Kyle Whittingham in year 2 determines what the ceiling is for Michigan. Michigan is already a team that's built to win, because when they made this hire, it was such a perfect fit, because the style Michigan wants to win with is the same style that Kyle Whittingham has been winning with all his time at Utah. So this is already a team that, in spite of them not being strong at certain positions, they're strong at the positions that matter when it comes to Michigan winning the way that Michigan has been successful with in years past. Last year, they were averaging nearly over 200 yards per game, and this was with them having an offensive line that at one point was starting 6 different combinations with all the injuries they were dealing with at that position. So the foundation, the identity is already there. So this isn't one of those new head coaches that has to instill a new culture, a new philosophy. It's already instilled. It's already been there. Now you just need a guy to maximize what was underutilized by the previous coaching staff. That's why the floor is so high for Michigan. If you can win 9 games with an average coach, which you had in Sharon Moore, then your floor should remain the same with you upgrading at head coach. And you also bring back a lot of very important key contributors from last year's team. Jordan Marshall, who was a freshman last season, rushed for 932 yards, was averaging 6.2 yards per carry. That means every 2 carries that Jordan Marshall got, he was averaging a first down. Kyle Whittingham is going to love this guy because he loves running backs. What about receivers? Because, you know, Bryce Underwood didn't really have any wide receivers. So when you think about Michigan, you think of a team that always has a great ground game, but they never have dynamic receivers on the outside. Well, they had Andrew Marsh last year, who was a true freshman who led the team in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And with them bringing in Texas transfer Jamie Finch, who comes from my hometown, Jacksonville, Mandarin High School, which normally pumps out pretty productive college football players, I think that there's going to be a good amount of talent around Bryce Underwood for him to take a big step up in improvement in year 2. And offensively, Michigan has enough to be able to win the way that we normally see Michigan win when they're at their best. And I think an underrated area of Michigan that I think is not being talked about enough is the coaching staff that Kyle Whittingham is bringing in, and particularly bringing offensive coordinator Jason Beck from Utah to Ann Arbor. Jason Beck's offense fits Bryce Underwood's skill set perfectly because it uses design quarterback runs, RPOs, simplified reads that allow athletic quarterbacks to play fast without having to overthink everything. Because there were times last year where you watch Bryce Underwood play and he didn't really look that decisive. He kind of looked like he was struggling to figure out what to do with the football. So Jason Beck's offense makes that a lot simpler for Bryce Underwood. As they used to say, keep it simple, stupid. And that's what Jason Beck's offense does. And Devin Dampier, you know, the only difference between him and Bryce Underwood is that Bryce Underwood has way better physical traits, stronger arm, better athlete, bigger in size. But Devin Dampier improved last season. His first year playing against Power 4 competition, he improved as a passer. When he was coming from New Mexico State in his first year playing in Jason Beck's offense, he was more so a better runner than he was a thrower of the football. And at Utah, he improved from becoming just a good running quarterback to becoming a true all-around dual-threat quarterback. So if you can see Devin Dampier improve the way he has under the last few years in Jason Beck's offense, I can expect that same improvement out of Bryce Underwood, who has a little bit more potential and way more physical tools to work with than what Devin Dampier had. And you're giving Jason Beck, Jordan Marshall, Andrew Marsh, and Jamie Finch. I don't see how we don't see Jason Beck bring out the best version of Bryce Underwood. And I think what determines if Michigan makes it to the college football playoffs or not are the 3 swing games on their schedule this year, which is Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. I think that Michigan is going to beat Oklahoma at home. I can't see them losing twice to OU, especially with Kyle Whittingham, who I think has the coaching advantage in that game. I can see them beating Penn State. I think that they're a better team than what Penn State is right now. So I think the 3 swing games that determines if Michigan makes it to the playoff or if they're on the outside looking in is when they got to play Indiana at home. And then when you got to close this season out against Oregon and Ohio State on the road, they got to win at least 2 of those games to get to 10 wins or more. I think they have a better shot at beating Indiana than they do Oregon, Ohio State, just simply from what Indiana has lost. Plus, you have home field advantage against Indiana in that game compared to having to go on the road and win against Oregon, win against Ohio State. Now, the Ohio State game, don't get me wrong, is definitely winnable because you've owned Ohio State for over the last half a decade. And Kyle Whittingham, being an upgraded head coach, you know, the way he wants to play football is the way that you've beaten Ohio State and owned them in this rivalry over the last couple of years. So Michigan needs to win at least 2 out of 3 of these swing games with Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State to get to the playoffs. And if they're able to accomplish that, I think that Kyle Whittingham's first season ends up being more than just a massive overachievement. It ends up proving that he is legitimately one of the best coaches in college football that we've seen for over the past decade. This dude is so underrated, and I was so happy when he got hired to get this job because he deserves it. He's been so underrated for so many years, and I think with what he can do this season, he's going to start getting a lot more flowers than what he's received over these past few years. We got to talk about the uncomfortable truth about Nebraska under Matt Rhule. And I feel very conflicted talking about Nebraska right now because I think that Matt Rhule has done a phenomenal job with this program. But the sport has become so college football playoffs or you're irrelevant that the progress that Matt Rhule has made at Nebraska has been greatly diminished. Because you bring up what Matt Rhule has done at Nebraska so far to a casual college football fan, and you know what they say? What has he won? What has Matt Rhule won? And that question irritates the hell out of me. Because what do you mean, what has Matt Rhule won? Nebraska doesn't need to make it to the freaking college football playoffs for what Matt Rhule has done in his last few years coaching this program to be wildly successful. Before Matt Rhule became Nebraska's head coach, this program was at the bottom. And when I mean the bottom, they were at the bottom. When Scott Frost was the head coach of this program, if you were a team in the Big 10 and you saw Nebraska on your schedule, you looked at them as dog food. You looked at them as a free win. There was a point that Nebraska was so down, they were treating close losses like they were championships. They were celebrating how Scott Frost had 22 losses decided by 1 possession. They were treating 1-score losses like they were championships. That's how bad Nebraska was. That's how much at the bottom this program was. So for them to go from that to being a respectable 7-win program, I think is massive progress that's getting overlooked because they're not contending for a spot in the Big Ten championship, or they're not contending for a playoff spot. You know, progress in this sport isn't always measured by how many playoff appearances you have, how many conference championships do you have. You know, I think that progress for Nebraska is, at best, they win 9 games. I think that's the ceiling for Nebraska under Matt Rhule, with the occasional every once 6 years, you get you a 10-win season and you sneak into the playoffs. But I think realistically, fair expectations for Nebraska are what you've seen Matt Rhule produce these last 2 years. Winning 7 games, I think, is fair for Nebraska. You know, now, of course, the fan base has higher expectations. You don't just want to be okay with being a middle-end Big Ten team. But I eventually think that Nebraska will get to a point where you'll consistently see this team win 8 games. But I don't think they're going to be this consistent 9-10 program. I think those days are long gone. Oregon Michigan, Penn State, USC, Ohio State, they just have so much money to spend. And Nebraska's not broke, but Matt Rhule has come out plenty of times and said that realistically, they need to be operating between 40 to 50 million as far as NIL goes in order for them to be able to compete with the top of this conference. And right now, I still don't think Nebraska has that, and I don't think they're capable of being able to get to that point where they're consistently in the mix to win the Big 10 championship. I think for Nebraska, at this point, fair, reasonable expectations for them under Matt Rhule is what you've seen these past 2 years. You win 7 games, you make it to a bowl game, and occasionally, every 6 years, you could be good enough to field a team that has the possibility of winning 9, maybe 10 games. But to see this program just consistently competing for the top of the Big Ten, I just think is incredibly unrealistic. And the college football playoffs has destroyed the value of fair expectations and normal progress in this sport. And how we got to this point is because Indiana made the impossible the new norm. Thanks to what Curt Cignetti has done at Indiana these last few years, programs like Nebraska look at that and they point at Matt Rhule and say, why can't you just do what Curt Cignetti did? Because if Curt Cignetti can take a team that's been an afterthought in the Big Ten since the beginning of this century to a national championship from rock bottom to the top of the food chain, why can't you do that here at Nebraska, Matt Rhule? It's not like we're a program that has no history. At one point, we were running the sport. So if we used to run the sport back in the old days, we can run the sport now that it's legal to pay everybody. So what's the holdup? Curt Cignetti did it. Why can't you do it? It's been done before. You should be able to do it. And that's the thing, like, it's a reason why Curt Cignetti's turnaround is considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest turnaround in the history of sports, because you don't see it happen every single day. What Curt Cignetti did is an exception. It's not a blueprint that everybody can copy, mainly Matt Rhule. Like, sure, what Indiana did, you feel if you're in Nebraska, you can do that too. But Indiana, what they did is just so magical. I think everybody trying to chase it, it's just going to chase themselves into disappointment because there's only one Curt Cignetti. And I get it that Matt Rhule just got an extension and you expect more, but I do believe that Matt Rhule has this program trending in the right direction, but there seems to be a little bit of impatience when it comes to how good Nebraska should be this year coming up. Like, it shouldn't be, oh, if you don't make it to the playoffs, it's a failed season. If you don't win 9 games, it's a failed season. You went from being an afterthought, dog food for other teams in your conference to now being a team that you got to respect. And I feel being respectable is huge progress for Nebraska that they're going to continue to build on. And eventually they'll get to a point when they'll have the occasional 9, 10-win season. I think they're a lot like South Carolina. South Carolina had a 9-win season 2 years ago, and then they fell off the face of the earth last season because that's just what comes with coaching at South Carolina. They don't have the resources that some of these blue blood programs running the top of the SEC do. So you're not consistently going to see South Carolina winning 9, 10 games every year. Every so often, they'll have a team good enough to accomplish that. And that's what I see with Nebraska under Matt Rhule. I think for the most part, Matt Rhule has done a very good job. And I think this season, Nebraska could shock some people with them getting Anthony Calandria out of the transfer portal. Some of the changes that Matt Rhule has made internally, especially on the coaching staff with his new defensive coordinator. I think Nebraska is getting there. I just think that people got to be a little bit more patient, man, and stop trying to judge Nebraska the same way you're judging Texas and LSU. There are 2 different programs and 2 different tiers, and you have to judge them by the tier that they're in. And I think with how bad Nebraska has been, pre-Matt Rhule, the success he's had these last 2 years deserves a little bit more praise than what it's received because they're not making it to the playoffs. If you haven't already, go ahead, check us out wherever you get your podcast from. JT Sports. We're available on Apple, Spotify. The links are down in the description below. You can find this episode along with all of our previous ones in audio format. Wherever you get your podcast from, the links are down in the description below. If you enjoy the content, you want to support the grind, all we ask is that you give us a 5-star review. Takes less than 10 seconds to do. The links are down in the description below. Let's continue on. I had a subscriber that hit me up the other day in the DMs on X, and he asked, JT, what makes Ohio State wide receiver U? Why is Ohio State producing more higher quality NFL wide receivers more consistently than anybody else? LSU, Alabama, USC have all put great receivers into the league, but Ohio State, it seems like every year they have another first-round wide receiver who ends up instantly breaking out in the NFL. What's up with that? What makes Ohio State, their wide receiver development, so different compared to everybody else in the sport? You know, I've been thinking about this for a very long time about Ohio State. How do they just pump out these new wide receivers? How did Ohio State become the wide receiver factory that they are right now? I think it goes back to when Ohio State first got into the Big 10. Since the beginning of time, Ohio State has just had a better understanding of what an elite offense looks like compared to the rest of the Big 10. When you think of what the identity of the Big 10 conference is right now and what it's been since the beginning of its inception, it's been about smash mouth football, controlling the line of scrimmage, winning time of possession, running the football 30, 40, sometimes 50 times a game. And it hasn't really been about spreading the defense out, having all these explosive receivers on the outside. Ohio State, although they've always valued having a strong run game, they have understood that in order to win national championships, in order to consistently be a national title contender, you got to have dynamic weapons on the outside that can separate on the perimeter. And Michigan, Penn State, historically, they haven't really been programs that have pumped out great quarterbacks, great receivers to the level that Ohio State has. And I don't think they ever will get to that point. When Ohio State won their national championship and Michigan won their national championship, think about how differently those teams were stylistically. Sure, Ohio State had Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins, but they also had phenomenal wide receivers. Emeka Egbuka, Cornell Tate, Jeremiah Smith. Michigan, on the other hand, they didn't have the wide receiver talent that Ohio State had that year. They had Roman Wilson, Colson Loveland, solid guys. Colson Loveland is a dog for the Chicago Bears right now, but their identity during that national championship run was, we're going to run the football down your throat. There was a game they played against Penn State when they ended the game running the ball 30 straight times in a row. So that tells you the difference in philosophies when it comes to offense between Ohio State and the rest of this conference. Penn State, they don't historically pump out a lot of great receivers, nor do they do quarterbacks. Like, Ohio State has always been so much better than the rest of the Big Ten at producing high-level quarterback play, and it's also contributed to the success that they've had in developing wide receivers, because you make your wide receivers look better when you have good quarterbacks that can get them the football. And I feel like Ohio State, even before Brian Hartline, they were always a wide receiver factory. Before you had your MSJs, your JSNs, your Garrett Wilsons of the world, you had guys like Ted Ginn, Chris Carter, who's a Hall of Famer in the NFL. So Ohio State has always been very good at pumping out great NFL receivers. It's just that Brian Hartline took a NFL wide receiver factory and turned it into the point where it now can run itself. And with Brian Hartline being gone, you may wonder if Ohio State is still going to be as good developing wide receivers as what they were with him on the staff. I don't think that changes, because what Brian Hartline did is make the wide receiver factory self-sufficient. Because now with what Brian Hartline built at Ohio State, he's already built the name to where Ohio State, you think of Brian Hartline for sure when it comes to Ohio State's wide receiver factory. But Ohio State's brand in general when it comes to wide receivers is a lot bigger than what Brian Hartline's brand is as a recruiter. If you go to a casual college football fan and you ask them, hey, why do you think Ohio State is so good at developing wide receivers? They probably tell you because Ohio State is just great at developing wide receivers. They probably wouldn't think that much about Brian Hartline and the impact that he had at making Ohio State this self-sufficient wide receiver factory. When Brian Hartline became Ohio State's wide receiver coach, what he did is that he taught guys how to get open, how to run routes outside of just in benefit of the system. A lot of wide receiver coaches, a lot of position coaches in general, when they're coaching up their position groups, they're coaching them up based on how to be successful within the scheme. Brian Hartline's advice, his coaching, extended far past being good, being productive in Ohio State system. I can teach you how to get open outside of just within our system. And that's why you see so many of these Brian Hartline products dominating in the NFL so early into their careers, because they've been taught to be better than just being confined within the system. A lot of schools, when it comes to their coaching styles, they teach guys how to be good within their scheme, within their system. And that's why sometimes you have guys that struggle to translate at the next level, because what they were taught was beneficiary for the system, for the program, for how they want to win games in college. It wasn't beneficial for the player at the next level. Prime example, Tennessee. Tennessee has produced some really good college receivers, but why is it that Ohio State's wide receivers have gone on to have more success in the NFL than what Tennessee's wide receivers have? Because Tennessee's wide receivers are good within the confines of Josh Heupel's offense. They're good because of the system. And that's why they don't have success anywhere outside of that system. Ohio State, on the other hand, how Brian Hartline taught release packages, route running, wasn't just, oh, this is what works to get open in the Ohio State system. No, this is what worked in the NFL for me. And it's going to work for you because this is transferable everywhere. My advice works no matter where you go, no matter if you finish your college career as a Buckeye or you transfer elsewhere. What I'm teaching you is going to translate everywhere you go, and it has translated very well to the next level. That's why you've seen so many of these Brian Hartline products be so good early into their NFL careers. And I also believe that with how well Ohio State recruits receivers, I mean, you have the best competition in your wide receiver room in America. Nobody's wide receiver room is as deep as what Ohio State's is. You go and you look at Ohio State's wide receiver room, it's nothing but 5 stars, guys that were either number 1, number 2, or a top 5 wide receiver in the recruiting class. So you got 5 stars on top of 5 stars, some of the best at their position coming out of high school, competing for a starting job. So when you have so much competition with so many talented players, I think that elevates the entirety of that position group. And I just think that Brian Hartline, what he has done now is, despite the success he's had, and he has since cashed in on that success, becoming USF's head coach, I feel he made the wide receiver factory bigger than him at this point. He deserves a lot of credit for the job he's done coaching up some of the great receivers that he's had to work with at Ohio State. But I think that his biggest accomplishment was taking the tradition that Ohio State already had before him and further expanding upon it to where now we unanimously affiliate wide receiver U with Ohio State. Sure, you got LSU, you got Alabama, but what's so funny is that Ohio State, you know who they replaced Brian Hartline with to coach up their wide receivers? They stole Cortez Hankton from LSU, who coached up Malik Neighbors and BTJ. And I think that LSU is probably the second closest school to rivaling Ohio State for the title of wide receiver. Sure, they got OBJ and Jarvis Landry and recently BTJ, Malik Neighbors, but that still doesn't top the receivers that Ohio State has put into the league. They put all pros into the league, like Michael Thomas. JSN was the offensive player of the year last year. Garrett Wilson is a dog. Emeka Ibuka is going to be a dog. Marvin Harrison Jr., I still believe, will eventually be a dog. Jeremiah Smith could be one of the greatest, if not the greatest wide receiver prospect ever. So Brian Hartline has just helped build the machine to being self-sustaining. And I think all these factors is what made Ohio State wide receiver U. Oh boy. Colorado is once again, like most occasions, is receiving attention for all the wrong reasons after some shocking comments made by projected starting quarterback JuJu Lewis at Big 12 Media Days. He said that last year, and I quote, "They weren't really looking at defenses. We were basically high school free balling, playing just football." Now, obviously, that sounds terrible. And it reinforces everything that all of the Deion Sanders Colorado haters have been saying about how this is an unserious program. Colorado is nothing but vibes and hype. Deion Sanders' popularity, his celebrity status is running the program. He's not a real coach. But I think that people are really stretching this quote and turning it into something bigger than what JuJu Lewis actually meant. I think that JuJu Lewis kind of misspoke. Obviously, he's a young player, isn't that media trained. So I think he was kind of saying that last year for him, not for the rest of the team, but for him, when he was out there, what the defense was running was looking like Spanish. It was looking like a foreign language to him. And this offseason, with the work that he's been putting in with new offensive coordinator Brendan Marion, he's a lot better at diagnosing what defenses are doing, what defenses are trying to do to slow him and the rest of Colorado's offense down. I think that people just hate Deion Sanders so much. They just take any small criticism that a former player has, a former employee has, or they'll take a quote from JuJu Lewis that could have been misspoken, and they'll blow it up to be bigger than what it is so they can continue to push their narrative that they want to be true, that Deion isn't a good coach and he's going to bomb this season at Colorado. I think the reason why there's so much hate for Deion Sanders as a college football head coach is that this is the only opportunity that people have really had to really get at Deion Sanders, because Deion Sanders made his whole brand of, kind of being full of himself. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why he called himself Prime, and he made himself a shit ton of money with this persona. But he also rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And those same people that hated him then but couldn't really go at him, because you can't go at Deion Sanders when he's dominating the game, he's in the Hall of Fame. So this is the next best avenue that they have to really get in on Deion, to really get their lip back on Deion from all those years that they couldn't, because Deion didn't really give you any reasons to have anything to have a critical opinion about. But now, with how last season was a step in the wrong direction from what you did in 2024, people have so much ammo to hate on Deion Sanders with. And I still believe that Deion Sanders is a halfway decent coach. I don't think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a bad coach. I think that this season is going to tell us just how good or how bad of a coach Deion Sanders truly is, because I don't think, contrary to popular belief, you can luck into having a 9-win season. Even if you do have great players such as Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, you still have to be somewhat of a competent coach to get the most out of those guys. Now, there have been occasions when you've had guys like Kevin Sumlin who were carried by the greatness of Johnny Manziel, and when Johnny Manziel left, Texas A&M fell off, and Kevin Sumlin eventually got fired, and he hasn't had the same success anywhere else as what he had early with Texas A&M when Johnny Football was there. But Deion Sanders has shown that he has a good eye for talent. He can find good receivers. He can find good running backs. He can find some good players on defense. I think more so Colorado had the season from hell last season that they did because Deion Sanders wasn't able to be as hands-on due to the battle that he was fighting with cancer. And if you listen to some of Deion Sanders' interviews at Big 12 Media Days, he alluded to how cancer made it hard for him to go about his day-to-day operations the same way as what he can now, being fully healthy, because, the guy just wasn't feeling himself. The guy was having a hard time breathing at times. The guy was sweating like a mule in certain situations. So Deion Sanders, with the health battle that he had last year, it didn't allow him to be as hands-on as what he currently is right now, because you see the massive leap in recruiting that Colorado has made this offseason. They went from having one of the worst recruiting classes out of any Power 4 program last year to right now having one of the best recruiting classes in the Big 12. I think at the moment they have a top 40 class. They're getting 4 stars. They're getting a lot of very good 3-star guys. Like, Colorado's recruiting has really skyrocketed over the last few months. And I think that partially has been due to Deion Sanders being able to go about the normal operations that you have to go through as a head coach that he wasn't able to have last season, because the health battle that he was in with cancer just didn't allow him to have that level of commitment as what he does this offseason. And another thing is that people forget that Deion Sanders is still a young head coach learning. The guy has only been a head coach for only a handful of years. And sure, he had a little bit of success coaching in the SWAC. Coaching in the SWAC is way different from coaching Power 4 football, even if it is what is mostly considered to be the weakest Power 4 conference in America. It still is somewhat of a learning curve. And for Deion Sanders, still somewhat learning as a head coach, he has had to learn that when you're building a coaching staff, you just can't build it with friends and family. Like, look how different Deion Sanders' coaching staff is right now compared to his first few coaching staff. You had Warren Sapp, Marshall Faulk. You had all these guys that Deion Sanders was buddies with, guys that he was cool with. Now you have guys that Deion Sanders may not have that much history with, but it's not about history. It's about guys that are the most qualified to do the job. That's how he ended up landing Brennan Marion. Brennan Marion, for him to be Colorado's offensive coordinator right now, still feels like a dream. I was very shocked. Literally, my mouth dropped to the floor. No hyperbole. I'm being so dead-ass right now. When I saw the news pop up on my phone that Deion Sanders hired Brennan Marion as his offensive coordinator, I couldn't believe it. I almost thought that it was fake news. That's how good of an offensive coordinator Brennan Marion is. And not only did Deion Sanders make a very good offensive coordinator hire, his new defensive coordinator has been getting rave reviews. Deion Sanders said that this is the best coaching staff that he's ever had at any level of coaching. The SWAC, high school, little league, he's never had a coaching staff this good, because these are coaches that Deion Sanders hired not because he had history with all of them, but because they were the most qualified for the job. Last season, I think Pat Shurmur was the main reason why things went off the rails for Colorado, and most of us knew that Pat Shurmur should have been fired, but it's kind of hard to fire a guy that helped you have a 9-win season. But I think that Pat Shurmur's offense was a lot more freelancing, since that's what Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter did, because Pat Shurmur wasn't a good play caller. So there were probably a lot of plays that Shedeur Sanders either audibled out of or changed at the line of scrimmage at the last minute, because they just weren't good plays for the look that the defense was in at that moment. And with Shedeur being gone, and you replace him with Caden Salter, who doesn't have the IQ or the ability to get the offense in the right plays as what Shedeur had, Pat Shurmur's bad play calling got fully exposed for all of America to see. And the guy wasn't a good play caller with the Giants. He wasn't a good play caller with the Broncos. I don't know what Deion Sanders was thinking, making Pat Shurmur his offensive coordinator. But the guy's gone, and he's learned from his mistakes, and that's one thing that I admire about Deion. There are a lot of coaches that will double down, sometimes triple down on things that don't work. Billy Napier at Florida, he just now, at a new job at JMU, has admitted that his play calling is what sunk Florida and is what ultimately got him fired. If he would have gave up the play calling a lot earlier, maybe he would have kept his job and Florida would have had much more success. But a lot of coaches let their ego get in their way of making changes. And sometimes they make changes when it's already too little too late. Deion Sanders isn't doing that. Anytime Colorado has something that needs to be addressed, Deion Sanders goes out and he addresses it. The offensive line looks really good. He says that Colorado has 8 guys that are good enough to be starters. So, listen, I believe in Deion Sanders. I don't think Colorado's going to win a Big 12 championship or anything crazy this year, but I would be very shocked if they're not at least a bowl-eligible team, because Brendan Marion by himself should be good enough for this team to get the 6 wins. I think he's just too good of an offensive coordinator and too good of a recruiter for Colorado to have another down season as what they had last year. This team is as talented as they've ever been under Deion Sanders. He brought in guys that aren't there for the money. They're not there for the fame. They're not there for the clout that comes from playing under Deion Sanders. They're there just because they love football and they want to make Colorado football good again. So I think that this whole JuJu Lewis thing is being taken extremely out of proportion, just because people who already had some prejudice against Deion Sanders need a little bit more ammo to continue to put gasoline on the fire. I think that JuJu Lewis is going to be really good this season, and I think that Colorado is going to have a bounce-back season this year. The last thing I want to talk about before we get up on out of here, man, I understand that with name, image, and likeness, that some of these smaller conferences have to go to outside external sources to get funding to possibly be able to compete with the Big 10 and the SEC. But the Big 12 went completely OD with this Monster Energy sponsorship deal. This shit is everywhere. I was trying to watch Deion Sanders' Big 12 Media Day press conference, and if it wasn't Deion Sanders, if this was anybody else, I would have clicked off the video after 15 seconds, because the sponsorship is just too much in your face. It's one thing to throw a Monster Energy logo up. It's another thing to have it plastered everywhere to the point it takes too much of your attention away from the actual product. If the Big 12 fields look anything like how Big 12 Media Days look, with Monster Energy logos everywhere, you're putting Monster Energy logos in the middle of the field at the 50, in the red zone at the 20, I won't be watching a lot of Big 12 football. I get why their commissioner, Brett Umart, made this deal, but I don't think that the compensation that they're getting back from this is enough, considering just how much in your face Monster Energy is. I mean, you just look at the table and you look at the cloth in front of it. I see 3 Monster Energy logos. Do you really need 3 Monster Energy logos to sell me that I need to go get me a Monster Energy drink? Because that's pretty much what this is. I get it by now. I need to go up, get off my ass, and go caught me a Monster energy drink. But it's just too much in your face. It's just too distracting. This thing is everywhere. Then they got it in the background. Like, bro, I came for Deion Sanders, not to see freaking Monster Energy. Then they got the patches on the jersey. Got these guys looking like they're in NASCAR uniforms on the football field. It's crazy how the Big 12 sold their soul for roughly just a $1 million payout for all their schools to have this Monster Energy logo just plastered everywhere. They are not getting enough money from Monster Energy for the amount of exposure that they're giving this company, man. If the fields look anything like how the press conference looks, I'm out on the Big 12, and I love me some Big 12 football. I'm one of the biggest fans of the Big 12 that you will find, but the Big 12 is not getting paid enough for this kind of exposure. And sponsorships become a huge problem when it starts to compete with the actual product. This thing is just too aggressive. You're throwing it in my face. I get it. You want me to buy a Monster Energy drink. I'm still not going to buy one. And with you pushing this crap in my face even more, I'm going to be even more reluctant to buy a Monster Energy drink, because every time I see that shit in my eyes, in my peripheral, when I go to the corner store, I'm going to get irritated because I already keep seeing it getting pushed in my freaking face watching Big 12 football, man. Like, it's one thing to have a sponsorship. Just having the patches on the uniform should have been enough. That should have been $1 million by itself. But to have this logo 1, 2, 3, 4 times, it's unacceptable, man. It's just unacceptable. And if this is how the Big 12 fields look, I'm not going to be watching a lot of Big 12 football. And another thing is that the name is so ugly. Monster Energy Big 12 football, that doesn't sound like a conference you take serious. Imagine if the NFL named themselves Monster Energy NFL football. You just don't sound legit. You don't sound legit. You are better off just getting rid of the energy and naming yourself Monster Big 12 football. That has a better ring to it than Monster Energy Big 12 football. It's just a lot of word salad that you got to say the name. When I'm listening to the interviews at Big 12 Media Days that the panelists are doing with some of these coaches, and the host has to always mention Monster Energy Big 12 football, even he's getting worn out having to repeat that thing, because at first he kind of like Monster Energy Big 12 football. It sounds a little weird, but the more you say it, just the more aggravated you get having to say it, because how much more Monster Energy do you need to keep pushing in my face? You already are letting them show their logos all over your brand. Now you got to give them a name too. You got to allow them to be part of the name. You were better off just partnering with Aflac. I like the sound of Aflac Big 12 football much better than I like the sound of Monster Energy Big 12 football. Or you could have went Big 12 football sponsored by Monster Energy, man. Like Monster Energy Football Media Days, Monster Energy Big 12 Football Media Days. They are over D'ing it, man. Microsoft Big 12 football would sound a lot better than this. And I get what Brett Umark is trying to do. It's very smart. He's trying to help his conference be able to get on the SEC's level by finding outside ways to generate more revenue. But you know, I don't think he thought this all the way through, man. If I was Brent Umark and I was negotiating this deal, I would ask Monster Energy, so just how much exposure are you looking to get from this? And then they show me a little mock-up like this. I'm saying I'm out. Or else you got to bump up the pay, brother. The Big 12 should be getting $3 million per team for how much Monster Energy is just plastered all in your face, man. I hope the fields don't look like this. I really hope they don't look like this, man. This just looks so ugly. It just looks like a Pop Warner team. It looks like a Pop Warner team sponsored by Farrah and Farrah, sponsored by Dollar General, sponsored by Walmart. Like, damn. And then I just saw Kansas agree to some kind of brand deal or some kind of sponsorship when they're going to have a patch on their jersey. So you got the big Monster Energy patches, and then you're going to have the other individual packages that teams are going to put on their uniforms from negotiating their own brand or sponsorship deals. This is ridiculous. Is this really what college football is in the year 2026? Is this really what they've done to the game that we love? Turn it into an info commercial for Monster Energy drink? How many of you guys actually drank Monster Energy? Like, they were better off partnering with Gatorade. Gatorade Big 12 football. Big 12 football sponsored by Gatorade. Like, Monster Energy, what's the best they can do? I'm not getting on Brad Umark for getting outside the box. I'm getting on him for just how much he's allowing this sponsorship deal to just take away from what actually matters, which is the football. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Before you get up on out of here, go ahead, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon if you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football so you don't miss when we drop new content. We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. Follow us at JT Sports _. Any questions that you would like answered on a future episode, any topics that you would like discussed, send them in the DMs, add us at Instagram, on X, on TikTok, at JT Sports _ is where you can find us. You can find this episode along with all of our previous ones in audio format wherever you get your podcast from. Apple, Spotify, JT Sports is available. The links are down in the description below. And lastly, we want to talk ball with you. Join the JT Sports Discord server, link in the description. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another